those of you joining over on YouTube, I'm about to go live here on TikTok again. Um, Surprisingly, 5 days in a row, but just still being down, thinking about the election, what could have been, and everything. Struggling to come up with a lot of ideas for videos because there's not a lot of good news out there to talk about, and a lot of the stories circle or back to we don't know what's coming. So thought I'd do a live instead. We're going live now on TikTok. So we are live now over on TikTok again. Gonna try to do this again. Talk about the election. Talk about what comes next. How we move forward and where we go from here. What safeguards we have in place. And we are hearing some stuff about that. We're already hearing about how we've entered the find out phase. Some businesses are already suffering because of it. For those of you joining, we are talking elections, politics, news, just trying to sort things out from the election, where we go from here, how things look going forward, etc. So that's what we're talking about. And not a lot of good news out there right now. We have to see how the House shakes out. House has, I think, what did I see last number was 210 Republican, 201 Democrat. Waiting to see how the House shakes out as far as final count. Republicans may keep the House, but it's going to be a very slim majority. They're already infighting. They're mad at Speaker Johnson. He could be in for a fight for the speakership. They're already looking at potentially giving interim speaker the full speaker's gavel if there is a speaker fight, just because they don't have, they're not sure how their issues are going to go, etc. If they're going to be able to keep a speaker to the next 2 years in its entirety. There's talk about issues between members of the incoming Trump administration and Senate Republicans, because they want to hold leadership votes here in the coming week, and 2 out of the 3 that are up for leadership positions are anti-Trump Republicans, or some of Trump's agenda Republicans, more likely. And there's going to be leadership talks. Mitch McConnell will not be majority leader, which is a good thing. He's stepping out of leadership, and they got to figure out who's going to take his place. And members of the Trump administration are pissed. I will very proudly say I voted for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. And I would do it again. I have no regrets on that vote whatsoever. I voted because that's where we needed to. And I don't understand isn't Mitch like 400 years old? Yes, he is ancient. And handling a little housekeeping here. But Mitch McConnell's like 400 years old, and that's the problem. They need to come up with somebody new for leadership, and they're struggling. They don't know who's going to be Senate Majority Leader at this point. I don't remember the 2 names as far as was Biden a problem? Could be. Kamala Harris was very closely connected to Joe Biden, being his vice president. He gets a lot of blame for the day-to-day things that he really couldn't control. The economy is better than most people think about, because they look at what's going on in their immediate vicinity. They're not looking at the big picture. And she was trying to simultaneously take credit for the successes of the Biden administration, while still trying to walk away from Joe Biden and distance herself enough. She wasn't the problem. She was a good candidate. She was doing record things. Um, but they, uh, they had a very wide net they were trying to attract, and is that where they went wrong? I have not heard that she's in debt 20 million. And I'm handling my own moderation. Since I don't have a moderator. Now, I haven't heard that number confirmed anywhere that her campaign is in debt $20 million after raising $1 billion. I heard the billion. I never heard that she is in debt that much. Trump did not offer money to the Democrats. I guarantee that. I guarantee that. Or if he did, he wasn't serious. But there's going to be a lot of things going on. Looking at leadership, and I said this about Democrats too. Democrats have to get younger. Um, we have people in leadership positions that uh, end up, staying forever. Or you can't tell me that Nancy Pelosi is the best person to represent San Francisco. That they couldn't find anybody younger, or more representative of San Francisco. And that's not a knock on. Do I? I'm not discriminating necessarily against age. She's been there. She's 80 some. She's 82, I think. Maybe 84. I could be wrong. Maybe she's slightly younger. But she's been around for a long time. We have a lot of older politicians. One of the reasons I didn't vote for him. One of many. And I think they need to, the Democrats need to start getting and focusing on bringing up their younger stars. One of the problems I said going back well before I was on this app is both parties have a problem with age. And part of the issue is the silent generation and the boomers not getting the hell out of the way. The millennials and the Gen Xers, when they get when the millennials and the Gen Xers were old enough to enter Congress and start running for some of these seats, they, for the most part, didn't. There are some younger, yes, but they waited, you know, 10 years. They were 10 years past when the previous generation at the same age would have gone into politics. So, and people of my generation, I'm an elder millennial, we looked around, said everything's okay, and didn't do anything. We didn't step into leadership. We didn't step up and run for elected offices. We're now running in our 40s. But where was that energy when they were in their early to mid 20s? It wasn't there. And we need to do a better job for us people on the left or left leaning of having better younger candidates across the board. Now, Kamala Harris was, to me, a good candidate. She ran a great campaign. She made some mistakes. One of the things that's going to be questioned for a long time is, did they make the umbrella too wide? Did they screw up by campaigning for as long and as often as they did with Liz Cheney, trying to appeal to disenfranchised Republicans and trying to get those um, uh, did they do too much trying to getting all Republicans that were pissed off at Donald Trump to vote for him? Did they go too far? That's going to be discussed for a long time. And one of the reasons why we talk about it and why we're trying to break it down is to figure out where we go from here as a party. Now, I'm an independent. I have been an independent for 20 plus years. I lean Democratic. But I listen to both sides. However, there's not much good coming out of what the Republicans are talking about. Not right now. And, we got to figure out what went wrong in this election for the Democrats and fix it. Was it disillusionment with Joe Biden? Was that the reason they protested Kamala Harris? Because they were too mad at Joe Biden? Could be. Was it because they were mad at Kamala Harris for how she became the nominee? Could be. But I'll say to the people that were irritated with that and chose to vote against her or not vote for her, the same thing I said at the time when Republicans were freaking out about her being the nominee. Would you be having the same issues with it if Joe Biden had passed away and she became president at that moment and continued the race from there? If the answer is no, then you're mad for nothing. She was the logical choice because it was the end of July in an election year. If this was a year ago, yeah, there should have been a primary. There should have been that whole process. It shouldn't have just gone to her. But we were up against a wall with the timing, and we had to go with Kamala. She was always going to be the backup plan if something had happened to Biden. That was the plan. And she was the heir apparent. That only makes sense. And how do you go to your party and say, well, we're going to nominate Gavin Newsom or Shapiro in Pennsylvania or something, and we're going to go with another white guy over the sitting vice president who, I'm assuming was okay with running before Joe Biden gave her the endorsement. I guarantee there was a conversation before he came out and openly endorsed her. I don't think she was blindsided by that. Don't blame me. I didn't vote for him. For 4 years, I've seen some people here in my small town go around wearing hats that say, "Don't blame me, I voted for Trump." And I kind of laughed at him, thinking that was kind of ridiculous. Maybe I should get one of those that say, "Don't blame me, I voted for Harris," because how bad the next 4 years could be. Don't think they will be, but how bad they could be. We got some safeguards in place. I've been live the last few days talking about it, and they're not going to be able to do everything they want to do. They're going to try, but there are some safeguards. No, there are safeguards in place that are going to be, uh, you know, are you asking why, like, why is Trump being so quiet? Um, I don't know. In part, I think he's exhausted. I think it's finally caught up to him, and I don't think he intended to win. I really don't think he won. I don't know for sure that he wanted to win. He ran to stay out of prison. I think he was expecting to lose, and then he was going to immediately announce that he was running for 2028 and use his being a candidate again to delay all of his trials. I think that's what he wanted. If something's up, you know, I've been saying this the last few days. The numbers look weird, and there's 14, 15 million people who voted in 2020 that did not vote this election. And I have not. I got some days off coming. I'm gonna try. I don't know if I'll get to it, but I'm gonna try to get through all of um, the state races and see if the math adds. If they voted down ballot but didn't vote for Kamala Harris, that's entirely possible because the votes didn't go to Donald Trump. Oh yeah, I mean a lot of people on the Trump side is quiet, but part of the noise coming out of that camp wasn't actual supporters. It was paid bots because they'd all come in with the same type of profile, you know, some goofy picture and some generic name, and they would all make almost identical comments, especially at random weird times of the day, outside of peak times for people being awake in the United States. A lot of it was bots as far as social media goes. At least that's my experience. It looks shady. As far as the election, if they come up with something and they can prove something, okay. If there's evidence, I'll listen to evidence. I don't want to get on board for a conspiracy theory and say that, well, it was definitely something. Because we laughed at them for 4 years when they did that. And they kept saying, oh, it was stolen, it was stolen. We got proof, and then the proof never showed up. I'm, not going to say that it was stolen until I see some proof. Now, if there's proof, now we can talk. Maybe Musk has the expertise to do it, but, don't know. They want to put Elon Musk in charge of fiscal responsibility, and they were talking about cutting, $2 trillion from the federal budget. That could crash the economy. But here's the thing: they want to cut $2 trillion from the budget. I talked earlier in the live about safeguards, and there are safeguards in place. We have two of them in the Congress. One's the filibuster. We have the filibuster in place in the Senate. The Republicans aren't going to jettison it because they used the filibuster in the Senate the last 2 years to block a lot of things from going through. And they used it the 2 years before that to keep things from going through. So for 4 years, Republicans have been using it against Democrats. Now you have the House. House has not been called yet. We don't know who's going to be in control. It is looking like the Republicans may have control. There are currently 24 seats, I think, 23, 24 races have not been called. And Republicans only need 8. So they may have control of the House. But they're not going to, if they do, it's not going to be a big margin, And we've seen what happens when they don't have a big margin. They can't agree with themselves. So they're going to get through what they have to get through and what they can, but they're going to have to rely on Democrats to get around some of the craziest Republicans. And then you got the Senate with the filibuster. You got some moderate Republicans in there. Ultimately, they know they have to go back in 2 years and a third of the Senate has to be up for re-election. And there are more Republicans up for re-election in 2026 than there were this time. that tells me all I need to know. And I block people that say things like that. I just don't engage with the trolls. I block them. So, you know, it's not worth it. I don't need that negativity in my comment section. I don't need it in the live. I don't need it in my videos. And I believe sometime in my lifetime, which could be another 40, 50 years, I believe the United States will elect a woman. Don't know when, but I believe it's going to happen. Um, we will have to see what the next 4 years looks like for the Democrats. They are going to have to bounce back from this loss and evaluate. Candace Owens. Why? Why Candace Owens? Um, but Democrats are going to have to evaluate. They're going to have candidates running in elections coming up in 2 years. We're going to be starting to seriously talk primaries, and who's going to be in those primaries within about a year of now. Because primary season, it's a little later, usually in midterms, but still, we have Democrats are going to have to get some candidates out there, reevaluate, figure out who could be running in these, because there's a good chance if they play their cards right, they could win the Congress back in the midterms. Historically, and I know we're staring at maybe unprecedented times, but they always say that it is the party in control of the White House typically loses seats in the midterms. That's typically what happens. So Democrats are going to have to gain control in the midterms. No way what, Buster? What? You don't think Democrats can gain seats in the midterms? It's entirely possible. We're going to have more seats up for Senate in the midterms than they had this time. Republicans only had to defend 9 seats. The outcome in the Senate is actually not as surprising to me as it could have been. I was hopeful based on everything we were seeing in the media, in what was going on, in fundraising and everything. I was very hopeful that it was possible that the Democrats kept the Senate. But it wasn't probable. There were 34 seats up for election. Republicans only had to defend 9. I mean, that is a very thin margin for Democrats to do anything. And as it's looks like Democrats lost 4. Now, the next cycle in 2026, it's going to be more Republicans up for re-election. I think I don't remember the exact number. It's going to be closer to half of the seats that are up for grabs are going to be Republican. They should replace MTG. Well, Democrats had their best shot this time. There was a candidate that was backed by some Republicans, and it still wasn't enough. Now, here's something to consider. I did a video about this earlier today. They have talked about MTG being a potential cabinet pick for Donald Trump, that he may give her a cabinet position. Well, what happens? Okay, she could probably get confirmed by a Republican-controlled Congress, not a problem. So she sits on the cabinet for 4 years. Well, what does she do after? She's now out of Congress. Republicans would have a different voice in that seat, possibly a more moderate Republican, a saner Republican, and somebody more willing to, do what needs to be done and not, do what MAGA Republicans like to do, which is, you're doing it my way or I'm taking my ball and go home. So we'll see if any of that does happen. They are also talking about Tommy Tuberville out of Alabama, the senator, who blocked a lot of military promotions. They're talking about him as being a potential cabinet member in some capacity. I don't remember the exact position. Well, he'd be out of the Senate. And they would have to get somebody in that seat to replace him. And when Trump's term is over, and he will only get one term this time, period, they're not going to be probably in those positions anymore. Because even if Donald Trump, he's going to be term limited out after this term. And I don't know who runs for the Republicans after this, because nobody can motivate the Democratic base to nobody can motivate the Republican base like Donald Trump. That's just a fact. So who is their replacement? Who is their next person? Swiss the Rainbow, nice to see you. Lauren Boebert won in a different district now. That's unfortunate. It is, especially considering she was getting out fundraised 6-1 by her Democratic opponent. But she switched to a safe Republican district, and it worked. The district she moved to was considered safe. And I've used her primary as a thing when I'm talking about what the Democrats need to do in the next 2 to 4 years. When she got primaried for that seat, but with a race of 6 to 8 people. I think it was 6. And she only got 46% of the vote. 54% of Republicans voted against her in the primary in that district. The problem is they spread the field too thin, so the MAGA people in that district all supported her. There you go. She became the nominee, or for that district. She won the primary. And then what happened is, after the primary was over, all those Republican voters didn't say, well, you weren't good enough to vote for in the primary, so I'm going to vote for somebody else. They just went, oh, you got an R? Here you go. Here's my vote. So, but then what she did, not only that, by her switching districts, she probably would have gotten beat in her old district, because she almost didn't get reelected in the midterms in 22. Well, by letting a different Republican run in that district, that Republican won that race too, I believe. So Democrats didn't gain a seat there. So doing good here. But like I was talking about earlier, we're already hearing about some disagreements between congressional Republicans and the incoming Trump administration. They're already not taking the transition seriously. They're saying, things like there's paperwork that had to be filled out, hasn't been done, month overdue. They're not really pushing through to get to get all the paperwork done and to get the transition going. I don't think Donald Trump planned to win. I said that earlier in this live. I think he expected to lose, and he wanted to lose, because now the grift is over. The grift is over. He can't fleece his base for more money. He's not going to be able to come out with, I'm running, come send me money now stuff. He can't sell them more merchandise for Trump 2028 because he can't run in 28. They're never going to pass anything to allow him to run again. They're just not. Donald Trump would need a constitutional amendment to run for a third term. And that would mean getting 2/3 of both chambers of Congress, ain't going to happen, and getting 38 states to pass it, ain't going to happen. Now, I saw somebody suggesting that if it does happen, Obama should run again for the Democrats. And that was the other thing. Republicans are going to say, we can't do that. That would allow Obama to run again, and he could, because if they lift the term limit restriction, that would apply to Obama as well. So that's just not going to happen. I'm not going to hold out any hope for that. But we got work to do. We're hearing about some negative effects already coming, but it's going to be rough. We can survive it. A lot of what they want to do is not going to happen. I have been saying this since the election. Once I got past the grief stage and started thinking about it clearly and logically, congressional Republicans value power above everything else, and they know they have to be reelected. And that's half the problem. They're already infighting between themselves. Who keeps all the tariff money? Well, the tariff money is going to go to the government. The government will receive the money. That's not the problem. The problem is going to be who pays the tariff, and that's going to be us. Ultimately, we will pay it plus some. Because in all my years of working in retail, what I've seen is every step of the way, if your costs go up at, the dock, for example, which is where the tariff would be applied, when it gets shipped into the country, if that goes up 20%, well, now the first place it goes, they're going to raise their prices, probably not by 20. They're going to raise it by 25 and make a little extra on it, and it just keeps going. Can it go up to certain people like Trump? I don't believe so, and that's not what they did the last time. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if they try to do something like that, but I don't think that's legal. I just don't. I don't think there's anything legal there that they could do. And I did a video earlier today talking about it. I had this thought, looking back at some of the biggest economic downturns in our country. You had, the beginning of one with COVID, which led to Democrats getting done and fixing the economy, as well as they could, and got us to this point. You had the 2008 housing crisis, but that led to Barack Obama having the White House for 8 years. Them crashing the housing market directly led to Barack Obama and him having Democratic control of Congress. At one point, he had a supermajority. He had 60 seats in the Senate. He could pass anything he wanted. Now, that didn't last for very long. It was only a few months, but he still could. He could pass whatever he wanted. Then if you go back all the way back to the Great Depression, Great Depression happened in 1929. The only Iowan president, Herbert Hoover, was in charge, and he sat back and did nothing. He said, it's the stock market, it will sort itself out, everything will be fine. It didn't end up fine. It didn't sort itself out. But what was the outcome? That led to 20 years of a Democrat being in the White House. And all but 2 of those 20 years, they had complete control of Congress. There was only 2 years of the Truman administration where they didn't have control of Congress. Depending on how bad the effects of this Trump administration are, Democrats could be staring at a generation of being in power. It's possible. Now, it's all going to depend on what they do from there and how they approach the next 4 to 5 years, or next year to 2, because again, midterms. And it is entirely possible that the Democrats retake both sides of Congress in the midterms. And I know some people are saying they're going to get rid of the right to vote. Well, can't do that. Again, would take a constitutional amendment, and you're not going to get enough senators and Congress people to vote for it. Again, would take 38 states. 38 states aren't going to go for it. Same with ending birthright citizenship. Birthright citizenship, unless there is somehow a court case that ends up before the Supreme Court that would change it, birthright citizenship is based on the 14th Amendment that says all people born in the United States are citizens and subject to their jurisdiction, or some wording very close to that. I don't have the wording exactly memorized, but same point. Birthright citizenship isn't going anywhere. They're going to try. They're going to try to do things, but you know, there are some safeguards that are going to be in place, and we just have to hope they hold. Oh, still looking good there. Was dealing with some issues with TikTok on my live yesterday where I wasn't getting my my live pushed out to the FYP. Was just making sure that that didn't happen again this time. But for those people that are coming in, we're talking politics, talking news, talking the election, and looking now toward where we go from here. Where do we go from here? What do we do next? I was also talking about how we've already entered, in some cases, the find out stage. People are starting to, at least in some cases, from what I'm seeing on TikTok, having realizations of, oh no, I fucked up. I voted for the wrong side. I didn't know what I was voting for. And that is a problem. I've talked about it in the last couple of lives. Democrats have a problem. There's a lot of people that vote under the Democratic banner that don't vote every election. They only vote if they get everything they want. They protest vote. Look at what happened with Bernie Sanders in 2016. Bernie didn't get the nomination at the convention in 2016. They ran Hillary. And I've said then, I'll say now, Hillary was a bad choice. Hillary Clinton never should have been the Democratic nominee in 2016. Not even close. They could have ran a tree stump and probably beaten Donald Trump with anybody other than Hillary Clinton. And that's the truth. At least the way it looks. Hillary Clinton was unlikable. She was unlikable, came off as the elite. She didn't come off as being genuine and didn't run a good campaign. But people were also pissed about Bernie Sanders and Bernie not getting the nomination at the convention. And there was a segment of the voting populace in 2016 that chose to either not vote for president, vote third party, or vote for Donald Trump just because Bernie didn't get the nomination. Now, I've talked about it on a couple lives. I will admit it. I was one of the dumb fucks in 2016. But not because I voted in protest of Bernie. I voted third party because I looked at all the available data. I didn't like Hillary Clinton, and I didn't want to be on her side of history because I didn't like her. But I looked at all the data and said, she's going to win in a landslide. She's going to walk away with it. She doesn't need my vote. I can vote third party and make a change toward getting a third party up over that 5% threshold. Didn't do that either. Think you only got 3% nationally, something like that. And if the Democrats had ran anybody other than Hillary, we wouldn't be talking about Donald Trump now. Donald Trump didn't want to win the presidency in 2016. I don't think. He ran as a way of becoming more popular, getting more people to know who he is and promote his brand and to raise some money. And I think some people told him, you should run for president. You know, you won't get very far in the primary because you had a Bush in the primary. And then, you know, you'll raise a bunch of money. You can drop out after a couple of weeks, or no, after a couple of months. You'll have all this money that you can eventually then do something with yourself. And I think that's what the plan was. Well, then he fell ass backwards into the presidency because the Republican primary field was too expansive. They had 6, 8 people, and in the early states, everybody that wasn't a Trump supporter had a different idea and spread the vote too thin. So one by one, they went, oh, fuck, we can't win here. Dropped out, dropped out, dropped out, dropped out. And next thing you know, you're stuck with Donald Trump because he got most of the votes in the primary. I don't think he ever intended to win in 2016. But he did. He fell ass backwards into the presidency. Just like I don't think he intended to win in 2020 or 2024. He intended to win in 2020. But I don't think he intended to win in 2024. And people like that, I deal with. I mean, he didn't intend to win in 2024, I don't think. Because look, he's not celebrating. He's not gloating. He's not taking a victory lap. He took a victory lap in 2020 after he lost. He hasn't taken a victory lap when he won. I don't think he wanted to win because he doesn't want to do the job of being president. What he wanted was to continue to campaign because it was keeping him out of prison. And what he wanted, I believe, as I've talked about earlier in this live, is to go ahead, campaign up to this. He was going to lose, and then he was going to immediately say, I'm running in 2028. Why does it make no sense, Wesley? Look at what he was able to do by campaigning. He kept running out emails and grifting money from his base. They kept sending him money for everything under the sun, every little inconvenience he had. The billionaire Donald Trump, the successful billionaire. Oh no. Because it was a con. He was grifting. Wesley says, why would you want to run and go through all that if he didn't want to win? Because he was grifting money. At every turn in this campaign, he was able to send out an email saying, hey, send me more money. He doesn't have enough money. You don't understand how the rich think. Two, look at what he did. That's exactly how he operated the campaign. At every turn, in his campaign, at every slightest downturn, he was sending out fundraising emails going, send me more money. Send me more money. At every inconvenience in his life after he ran for president, after he won the presidency the first time, it was send him more money. Look, I got indicted. I got to pay my legal bills. Send me money. Oh, I'm going on trial. Send me money. You know, he was doing it at every turn. Every time he turned around, he was sending his base another email. I don't believe he intended to win the election. I believe he wanted to keep grifting up till he lost, come out when he loses and just announce that he's running again, and he was going to keep the grift going. He was going to continue to raise money and continue to fund his legal fees and everything. That was a big chunk of it. Deb says he was trying to sell Bibles, bobbleheads, commemorative coins, sneakers, watches, add in NFTs, baseball cards. What else? anything he could brand and sell, and it was always sold to the same people, and he was trying to raise money. He didn't want to win the presidency. He doesn't want to do any of the work of being president. And there's going to be a lot of things that he said he's going to get done. Uh-huh. I mean, there's going to be things that he said he's going to get done. There's a couple things that he's already said he was going to do after winning the election that haven't happened. He said within 24 hours of winning the election that he was going to end the war in Ukraine. War's still going on. We're 5 days away, 4 days away. That's a lot longer than 24 hours. He hasn't ended that yet. He said his tariffs weren't going to affect the economy. Prices weren't going to go up. We're already seeing reports out of the Wall Street Journal that companies are planning to raise tariffs, or they're raising prices because of the tariffs. Again, prices are going to go up. He said they wouldn't. Companies are saying we're going to do it. That's two things he said in the campaign that he was wrong about. Deb says he was found guilty by a jury. Yes, he was. How long did Joe have to fix the war? War's been going on almost 3 years. Here's the problem. Putin doesn't want to give in. We've never put any boots on the ground. We are not fighting that war. Ukraine's fighting Russia. The only thing that we're doing is we are supporting an ally in Ukraine. And what a lot of people don't understand that I've talked about is with a majority of the money that we spend on these things, it's us buying things to send them in the form of food and other aid supplies, or if it's military stuff, in a lot of cases, it's one of two things. Either we are going to American manufacturers and buying things that we are sending over and sending them new things, which are government contracts, which pay and put money in the economy and, generates a whole economic boom, or it's the second option. We look at our supply and go, oh, we got a bunch of stuff that is 10 and 20 years old. We're gonna fix those, and we're gonna buy new. You can have the old because they're still okay. I mean, we replace our own equipment and then turn around, we buy new, give them our old. We've upgraded our military by doing that, all under the banner of giving them aid. But a lot of people just see this, on a dollar amount. Oh, we're giving 10 billion in aid to Ukraine, and think we're just handing them a check, and that's not the case with most of it. Most of it is, like I said, it is things we are buying, or we are buying for ourselves and replacing stuff we had that we are sending their way. It's an economic multiplier. It's good for the economy. Besides that, Ukraine is an ally. Mark Miller says, I want to know how many Trumpers know how tariff works. Most of them don't. And they're going to find out the hard way. I've seen a news report about one rubber factory in upstate New York that closed. They said they couldn't be competitive because of the proposed tariffs that are coming. They already said we can't do it. There's other reports of factories saying, hey, guess what? No bonuses, no more raises the rest of the year. We're limiting overtime. Can't afford to pay it. We got to buy inventory ahead. because we got to beat the price hikes that are coming from tariffs. And Trump supporting Republicans are looking around going, what happened? Why is this going on? Why am I not getting my bonus? But they don't seem to have a problem giving tax cuts to the rich. You talking about Republican voters or Republican Congress people? I mean, they both do. But I was just curious which way you meant that. But the problem with the tax cuts to the rich, we have been told since the 80s, since Reagan, that if you cut the taxes to the rich, that it trickles down to you and me, the everyday person. It doesn't happen that way. They keep it. The people who look at the economy and look at and study these things as a profession have looked at it and said, this doesn't work. The money doesn't go down. It doesn't trickle down like what what we've been told to believe. It just doesn't happen. The best way to build the economy is put money in the hands of people who spend it. That's why usually in February to May of the year, when people's tax refunds come in, a lot of businesses start picking up steam. They start hiring people. They start giving their employees more hours. I worked in retail for a long time. I always hated the January 1 to March 1 or April 1 period where they would come to me and say, hey, we're not, we know our business is going to turn down from what it was, going October to December 31st. People are going to start tightening up till they start getting their tax money. You got to cut your schedule back. Can't have more people. And it happens every year. So, but then once the tax money rolls in, Stray, you're not wrong. You're not wrong about it being money that the government never should have taken in the first place. I know several people who have sat down with a calculator and figured out exactly how much, within a few bucks, of what they need to pay in taxes every year, and they have just that taken out of their checks, and they keep the majority of their paycheck because they don't want the government holding on to the money. The worst part for me about, I was just getting there, Stray, is the worst part about this is you pay in all year into taxes and you overpay, which is what your refund is. It's you overpaying your taxes, and they give you back what you overpaid. But the government gets it interest free. They get to borrow from you and me, and they don't have to pay any interest on that money. They get to use it for anywhere from a few days to an entire year without paying any interest on it. And people love seeing that tax refund every year when it's nice and big, and they go out and they spend it. I know multiple people. Why do they need to cut? Well, the problem with printing money is it's inflationary. And I know we're already fighting inflation. But when you just dump money into the economy like that, that's how you end up like some of these other countries where, I don't remember which country it was they were talking about, where you needed a suitcase full of their currency to go and spend like $2 of American currency. Like their exchange rate was horrendous. But if you went in and you bought something for $2 American and they were taking American currency, you'd need a suitcase full to cover the difference. Because their currency just isn't worth anything. And when you print more money, that's what happens. Government's not the only thing that is not the only way to create inflation. Government doesn't help with inflation. It helps, but it doesn't do enough with inflation. A big chunk of inflation is all, especially this last batch that we had with COVID, started with costs going up, which was inflationary. And then the rest of it was corporate greed. They went by and they said, we had to raise our prices because our costs went up. but our costs went down, but we'll keep the price the same. They'll keep paying it. They've been paying it all along, and they pocket the difference. I've worked in multiple retail sectors. That's one of the ways they do it. Corporate greed is always in it. That's a big chunk of it. There's also something I am not 100% familiar with. I will preface this. But there's some sort of a doctrine that says the first priority of corporations is to pay dividends to their shareholders. And a lot of them are drawn up in such a way that they have to meet certain obligations first before they pay anything else. And that includes wages. That they have to make a certain percentage to get paid back to their shareholders and their stakeholders before they pay anything. That is their expense number one. The way I understand it, and I'm not an expert on that at all, I will admit that. But the way I understand it, that's how that works. And it's year over year increases, which means they have to continuing to increase their wages, and they have to continue to increase their prices and everything along the way and cut their expenses. Trump going to lower corporate tax rates. Thoughts? Sure, he lowers corporate tax rates, but it's just like everything else. Those savings are not going to get passed on to us. I worked for one of my managers that when I worked in the retail sector, said multiple years ago now, it's been a while, right after, it was sometime after Obamacare came into effect. But we were looking at, we were doing a year over year analysis of expenses for our location. And even with the increased costs in everything, and the extra increase in, because we had to pay our share of insurance premiums and everything and just costs going up, etc. He was giddy as a schoolgirl that year to date, the month versus the previous month, of that month. I don't remember what month out of the year it was. They matched dollar for dollar. Their expenses didn't go up by basically anything. They had cut their expenses back to the point that we had no increase in expenses from the year previous. He was so big, but we made more in profit. Didn't pass those savings on anywhere. He was such a tightwad that he was even, he said that if I bought a bottle of Tylenol for the store, for the location, and you had a headache, you weren't allowed to use it. That was only if you got injured on company time and you had to cover from something that happened while you were working. Headaches and aches and pains didn't count. These corporate business people, they only care about balancing their balance sheet and having, making their profit margins. And if they can make a higher profit margin, they will. Just like after these tariffs, even if the tariffs get lifted within 3 months, unless they pass something preventing companies from continuing to keep their prices up, they're going to stay up. We're going to keep paying the added costs for a long time because they know they can. That's how these companies work. And a lot of them do that up and down the supply chain. And a lot of them because they have to make percentage goals on, you need to make a 10% profit. So if you have I was chiming in here. Carolyn says he will not do anything about price gouging. No, he's not going to. He doesn't care. He doesn't care about price gouging because he's he's a businessman. He's a rich guy. He's not going to look at it and say, well, we got to help the everyday person. He doesn't care. And he's going to let them have free reign. And this is what we were warning people about for almost 2 years. You know, we're going to be entering the find out stage for a lot of people. They are going to realize that we weren't saying it to be mean. We weren't saying things to scare people, etc. We were saying things that were true because we were afraid of the outcome and what could happen. You know, we're going to have to hunker down, watch what we buy. And this idea that you're going to hear out of Trump supporters, oh, well, why don't you just buy something entirely made American, or it's going to make everything be produced here in America. Here's the problem. These factories don't get built overnight. Okay? And you have to have the materials to build the factory. You have to have all this stuff. Sherry says, my neighbor thinks Trump is going to pay off her mortgage. Yeah, I don't know where that one came from, but that's hilarious. People don't understand that we are going to pay the price for everything they purchase on EV. We're gonna pay the price on everything. You know, these factories, like I was starting to say, they don't spring up overnight. You're gonna have to build a factory, okay? So you got to pay wages, you got to pay contractors, you got to do all this. It takes months to build a factory, sometimes years, to get it all done. I mean, they're talking for my town. They're building I haven't heard that it's been canceled. They were talking about a factory coming into town. We found out it was coming earlier this year, and I think it's going to be a year and a half to 2 years before it's operational. And they're going to, you know, even if all these factories, they don't, you know, it's going to take them a couple of years to build up, and then they still have to supply all of the materials they need to make all of the products. And there's a lot of things we don't make here. You have to import that, and we'll be paying increased tariffs on those imports, even for the stuff that's made here. Not 100% of everything is made here. We don't have all of the materials necessary. Haven't heard anything about it. They're not doing anything like that yet. They may, but they're not. They're talking about it, but they're not doing. They haven't. They're not in power yet. They don't have any of the power to build any of that yet. Now, are some private companies maybe building something in advance? That's possible, I guess. I hadn't thought of that until not right now. But and here's the thing. I had this thought after I did a couple of my videos and right before I went live. As far as the immigration thing goes, now here's a possibility. I know he says they want. He said they were going to get rid of everybody, and they were going to round them all up. Now, you know how Donald Trump likes to just say things happen, right? He likes to say things have happened that didn't happen. Is it possible that they don't round up a single person? He comes out after a couple of weeks and says, yeah, our efforts, they worked so great. We got rid of all the criminal, illegal immigrants. And that would be his term, not mine. And just says it happened. And his base would cheer and go, man, this is so great. And they look around their small town, not see very many or any, people they would assume were undocumented immigrants, and go, man, he did great. And just believe what he said. That's possible. Carolyn, yeah, they were talking about potentially having to do something. One of the laws he has talked about reenacting is the same thing that they used during World War II to inter the Japanese Americans. He was talking about reinvoking that same idea. And trying to claim that people coming across the southern border equates us to being at war. And that could get messy. That'll end up in tons of legal challenges. And I don't think I don't think they'll be able to actually pull it off. But there is. Would I be surprised if they tried it? No. I don't know if the border. There's too many factors at play for me to say that it was definitively the border. But and I really thought I think she needed that Donald Trump killing that border bill was going to be good enough for her to run on. Um, the problem is here's what's going to probably happen is my guess, and I admit I was wrong going into the election. I was convinced she was going to win. Um, is that they're going to bring back that bipartisan border bill, probably exactly like it was, and pass it. Donald Trump is going to get credit for it. Goval says he was going to use it only for convicted criminal illegals. Yeah, but if you listen to what he's actually said and what some of his closest advisors say, that counts all of them. That counts anybody who's here. Let's see. Carolyn says, honestly, do people see illegal immigrants in the streets committing crimes? No, most of them don't. But they believe, they believe these stories because they've never left their small town. They've never lived outside of their small town. And, I grew up in a small-ish town. And the type of town where you could leave your front door unlocked and you could leave it unlocked for days and be out of the state. And never have anything happen. It was one of those kind of towns, But when you go to the bigger city, just because you're around more people, you get people from that small town who have never left said, "Oh, you're going over there, oh, you're going to Kansas City, you're going to Des Moines, you're going to Chicago. Oh, you better take your gun, you better lock your doors, you better be on your guard. Nothing bad will happen. Nothing good will happen to you out there." I know somebody who lives in one of those small towns right now. I was talking about making a trip to Vegas next year and was talking to him about going with me. And he said, no, I don't think I want to go. I wouldn't enjoy myself in a big town like that. I'd be on edge, all the time, head on a swivel, convinced, because you gotta always be on a lookout that something's gonna happen when you're in a big area like that. He's so convinced that these big cities are so full of crime that everywhere you look, every person you see is going to do something to you. And that's how these people think about the undocumented immigrants. Because they're usually in bigger population centers, because that's where the jobs are, that they're here, they must be committing crimes. They rope the two things in together. It's just like the whole issue they had Speaking of the election, which we were talking about way earlier, I just thought of this. Something I find it very interesting. You don't hear a word out of the Republicans about non-citizens voting anymore, do you? Now that they won? Don't hear a word about it. But leading up to the election, it was millions and millions of non-citizens that were going to vote. You don't hear about it. They're not talking about it now. They're not saying a word about that. It's because they're here to work. They come in, they keep their head down. I've said it in I don't know how many videos. They weren't going to risk voting and getting arrested, getting deported, and all of that by doing something they didn't have the right to do. Most of the undocumented citizens, and I would say most, I don't know the number, but if I had to guess, I would say 90 to 95% of them or more are just here living their day to day life. They get up, they go to work, they make a little money, they go home. And they're not out looking to do anything because they want to stay for they don't want to get caught. They don't want to do anything. Election was a repudiation of far left politics and resulted in the biggest GOP victory in my lifetime. I would disagree, Joseph. I think part of the problem is the Democrats tried to go too far both directions. They had their umbrella open too big. Um, she spent the last couple weeks of the campaign out campaigning with Liz Cheney, who is definitely right of center. And I think that they were just trying to encompass everybody. If they would have leaned farther right or farther left, and stayed away from trying to court the Republican voters, I think they would have won. Because, Joe Biden he was a moderate, but he ran on some left leaning ideas. He was talking about, maybe not giving people free education, but canceling some student loan debt, giving people home credits. When he ran on giving first time home buyer tax breaks. That made my day. But yes, it is like Joe Biden ran on left leaning ideas, and he just didn't go far left, and that got him in. And I don't know. We'll have to see how they. Oh, you're fine. You're fine. Miss you too. That is a friend of mine. That is an old joke between us. But we had Joe Biden ran on some left-leaning ideas, maybe not far enough left, and Kamala Harris had some, and then she tried to backtrack herself to the center to try to encompass the disenfranchised, disillusioned Republicans. So we'll see how the Democrats come back out of this. She turned around and, she tried to encompass everybody. Now Democrats have to look at it. They have to figure out where they went wrong, figure out what they can win on, and they got to do that between now and the midterms, between now and 2022. Just because they have to get back at. Okay. Lost my train of thought here. Ron Free says, but Trump is evil and he still won. How odd. It is kind of odd. But as I've been looking at the numbers, I've had a few thoughts on this. I've talked about it in several lives the last couple days. Thinking back to 2020, we had everything shut down with COVID, right? We had, because of being afraid of spreading COVID, everything was easy. A lot of states mailed you everything you needed. They mailed everybody a voter registration card if you weren't registered. You mail it back, you fill it out, do all that stuff. They mail you an absentee request form. If you're already registered, they mailed you an absentee request form. They mailed you the ballot in a lot of cases, in a lot of states. People didn't have to go anywhere to vote. You know, in 2020, you didn't have to do much to go vote. They mailed you everything you needed. So people, and they were sitting at home watching the news more. They were constantly on a news feed or watching TV or whatever. Everything was there. Everything was right in front of them. And they were looking around. Uh, Rotunda says, it's just half America is evil with a lot of hatred, with, which is what Trump radiates. He does radiate hatred. And I wouldn't say half. I would argue that hold on, I got a content thing here. They're getting mad and starting to report my feed. Well, the only reason I say not half is there's 330 Americans. We had in the presidential race about 140 Americans that voted. Give or take. I'm using rough numbers. That leaves about 190 people who didn't vote at all. That didn't show up, that could have voted, that didn't. And I know not every one of those would be an eligible voter for one reason or another. But still, looking at those numbers, that's not half. Hang on. No, he did play on a lot of people's anger and fear. And that is true. He did play on a lot of people's anger and fear, and a lot of the idea of you have to be with us. Um, but no, there's the Democrats got a lot of work to do. They got to figure out where they went wrong, where they can retool for the midterms, and then they have to figure out who they run. Uh, who they run in 2028. Rotunda, I would agree. We are a country divided. Um, we do have to figure out how to heal that divide. And that's not going to be easy. We have to get through the next 4 years. It's going to get expensive. Prices are going to go up. I've talked about that in the live. With the tariffs. And, you know, after that, we will have to see what happens in 2028. If things get as bad as some people are saying it could, uh, I don't see the Republicans, no matter who they run in 2028, winning. It just isn't going to happen. And besides, who do they run? I've asked this question numerous times in my lives the last few days. Who do the Republicans run in 2028? Who's deep enough? Who is on the Republican bench right now that could run a presidential campaign and capture as many votes as Donald Trump? I will, my friend. Uh, Rotunda, I don't think there's going to be as much damage as we're worried about. There are some safeguards in place, and part of the issue is going to be, um, whether or not, Republicans can get along with each other. We're already hearing, you know, they're talking about changing the rules for the Speaker of the House. You know, like one of the things with the Speaker, okay? January 3rd, they have to elect a Speaker. They are going to be, if they have the majority in the House, which isn't decided yet. There are still 23 or 24 races to call with the U.S. House of Representatives. Now, Republicans only need to win 8. They are probably going to have control of the House, but not by a very big margin. They're going to be in about the same shape they are now if they have control, if not slightly worse. So they're going to have to come up with a speaker, and they're already pissed at Mike Johnson. It took them 3 weeks to get to Mike Johnson. And they're pissed at him because he worked with Democrats to make sure we didn't shut the government down right before the election. Because he knew if they shut the government down, Republicans wouldn't have won this election. If you want to talk about what a landslide could have been, if the government would have shut down with 3 weeks to go to the election, or a month to go to the election, whatever it was, that would have been a landslide for the Democrats. A landslide. But they didn't want the government shut down, so he worked with Democrats. Well, now they're pissed. They're talking about voting him out. And now they want to change the rules for either after he comes back or after they come back from their break, or for next Congress, which starts January 3rd, if they're in the majority, to not only keep the one vote vacate thing in, where anybody can call for a vote to vacate the speaker, or they can, but if they do vacate the speaker, they want to change the rules so anybody who has been given the speaker's gavel as like an interim thing, because like if Mike Johnson can't be there for a day or whatever, there's going to be a temporary speaker or whatever they call it. I can't remember the exact term. That person can still do what they did. They can do all of the business of the House of Representatives without having an actual speaker. So they're looking at making some rule changes. They're fighting amongst themselves already because they know they can't entirely get along. I think it's this coming week, they are holding secret votes with private ballots in the Senate to figure out speaker leadership. Mitch McConnell is not going to be the majority leader. He is not going to be part of Senate leadership. And there's already talks that 2 out of the 3 names that have been so far mentioned are not 100% on board with all of Donald Trump's policies. And some Republicans are pissed, and some people that are going to be part of the Trump administration are pissed that Mitch McConnell and these Republicans want to do their leadership vote now and not wait till January when the new leadership of the Senate, and wait for all the new members and everything else. Well, they're only going to have 54 votes in the Senate. They're not going to have a 60-vote supermajority. The filibuster is going to hold in the Senate. They're not going to jettison the filibuster. I've talked about that earlier in the live. Republicans aren't going to get rid of it because the last 4 years they've been using it to block a lot of what Joe Biden wanted to get done. They are going to use the Democrats are going to use the filibuster to prevent a lot of things in the Senate, because they know, and Republicans even know, they have to get reelected in 2 years. 33 Senate seats are going to be up for grabs in 2026, and it's going to be back to being closer to 50-50. This was a bad year for Democratic senators because of math. 34 seats were up for grabs, and Republicans only had to defend 9. They were only 9 Republican incumbents this term. That's it. They had what was it, 24 seats were defended by Democrats. That's a lot. Like, there was a lot of races out there, and with only having a thin majority in the Senate, control of the Senate didn't need much to flip. Next time it's going to be a lot closer. It's going to be a little easier for Democrats to pick up seats in the Senate. And the House, I fully expect Democrats to get the House back in the midterms. Fully expect them to get the House back in the midterms. I mean, take that for what it's worth. I said they were going to have the House by 40, 50 seats this time. And if all of the voters that voted for Joe Biden showed up and voted in this election, I believe they would have had the House by 40, 50 seats. They would have had Kamala Harris as president. They would have still had the Senate. And I can tell exactly what I need to do just based on that username. They make it easy. I don't deal with people like that. I block a lot of them. Now, I'm not saying I don't block everybody I disagree with politically. But I talk, if you can come to me with policies and things like that, I'll talk policy. But when you come in with a name like, what was it? Libtard's Nightmare. You're not, I can tell somebody with a username like that is not going to be talking policy. They're going to be slinging insults. Well, thank you, Rotunda. I try. I know a little about a lot. And I'm always looking at things, looking to try to learn something. And like with government, I took a college level government class just a few years ago. Would have been in 2018, I think, is when I took my government class as I was working on my degree. And working on a degree anyway. And anyway, I took government mostly because it was going to be an easy grade. But, I figured it wouldn't hurt to brush up on it. And I was right on both counts. And some of the things that I learned in there was kind of interesting. And that's part of why I created over on my YouTube page. I have a whole playlist, well, not very long, but a playlist of government answers videos where I try to see comments and things that I see popping up in just my comment section, other creators' comment sections, live comments that I see where people are just wrong about how government works or just don't know how certain things in government work. And I try to clear things up a little bit if I can. Couple topics I've covered is, what it takes to pass an amendment, what it takes to become a state, the presidential line of succession, why it is what it is, and how it actually works. I've seen a lot of people not know exactly how the presidential line of succession goes. Things like that. Trying to remember. I did a few others too. And just trying to do what I can to help people understand what's going on. And sometimes doing this is just as much about me talking about what I see and trying to figure it out for myself. I'm still trying to figure out this election loss. Because everything looked good going into the election. I saw an article that was talking about the Seltzer poll coming out of Iowa on Sunday, right before the election. Came out and said Kamala Harris 47%, Donald Trump 44%. And she was wrong. And she's considered one of the best pollsters in the nation. Now, if you followed me for any length of time, I thought all the polls were bullshit. I've seen so many issues with polls going all the way back to 2016. I thought they were overcompensating for Donald Trump, and and thought that, uh, the polls were underestimating how good Kamala was really going to do. Then that poll comes out. I even said I didn't trust that poll. I didn't think that was going to be an accurate reflection. Um, but I thought it was interesting. Well, that pollster, Ann Selzer, has come out and said uh, she thinks what went wrong is by putting out that poll, she encouraged more Republicans to come out and vote for Donald Trump. People who would have been disenfranchised or disillusioned enough or whatever to think that they couldn't win to come out and vote. And they voted for Trump because of her poll. I don't know. I don't know if that's the case. I was encouraged by the Iowa poll, and I know a lot of people were. There were a lot of people saying that with the Iowa poll showing Ann Selzer saying that Kamala Harris could take Iowa, that, well, if she wins Iowa, she could win Ohio. Charles Henley says, what do you think about people who saying their votes were not counted? I've seen a lot of people say that. The thing is about them saying their votes weren't counted, some of that comes from, is it vote.org? And them tracking your absentee ballots and stuff. And I've seen a lot of things about that. Some saying it's really accurate. Others saying that they've looked into it and they were told it could take up to 45 days for all of that information to track and update. And I don't know what to think about any of it. I don't know if there is anything there or not. But I talked about it earlier in the live. I think part of the reason why there was 14 to 15 million Joe Biden voters that did not vote for Kamala Harris was because, or not because they didn't like her, but because maybe it wasn't as easy to vote as it was in 2020. I'm just throwing this out there as a suggestion. Maybe it was because of how easy voting was made in 2020. A lot of states made voting super easy. Either they mailed you voter registration cards, they mailed you the ballot when you mailed that back, or your request form for a ballot, then they mailed you the ballot, whatever. You didn't have to go anywhere, you didn't have to do anything, you didn't even have to find a stamp in a lot of cases because it was paid postage. And I've said that in other lives I've done this week, that 15 million had something to do with Gaza. I have said, could it be the war in Gaza? Could it be the war in Ukraine that's still going on as some kind of a protest vote? Could it have to do with how Joe Biden was treated prior to him stepping out of the race and that people were mad that he wasn't still in the race? Could it have to do with how Kamala Harris became the nominee? I know there were some Democrats that wanted a big messy fight at the convention to try to select a new winner. Nice to have another Iowan here. We get a few in my lives and in my comment sections and stuff. There's a lot of reasons. Democrats have to figure out what went wrong and figure out how to retool their message into. She stood for a lot. The problem is there's so much that still needs to be fixed and still needs to be done that a lot of her messaging got lost, in part because there's so much and because Donald Trump is that bad. Okay? That's the other half of it. There was so much negative about Donald Trump that her message got lost. And the media is partially to blame for that. They covered Joe Biden having one bad debate for about 3 weeks. The top story was always, is Joe going to drop out? This person says Joe should drop out. This person says Joe should drop out. Is Joe dropping out? Is he going to stay? Uh-huh. And And the media covered Joe Biden with a fine tooth comb over that bad debate. Where was that same coverage after the disaster that was the Kamala Harris Donald Trump debate? I had Vinweed, I had been saying since July that Iowa was in play. I thought Iowa was in play after July when the 6 week abortion ban was allowed to take effect from the Iowa Supreme Court. I thought that was going to put Iowa over the top. And I was convinced that ban was going to not only give Kamala Harris Iowa, but 2 to 4 House seats were going to flip because of it. And then when the Seltzer poll came out at the very end, that just confirmed what I was already seeing, what I was thinking. And then Iowa came out and did Iowa things. But remember, Iowa, for example, prior to Donald Trump entering politics, we went blue twice for Obama. We went blue for Gore. What happened? Iowa used to be a swing state. I talked about this in a previous live. I remember in 2012 when Obama was campaigning in Iowa because it was a swing. It's still considered a swing state, even though he carried it the election before. And one of the coolest things, I didn't get to see Obama speak in Iowa during the 2012 election cycle. However, I happened to be traveling down a road Obama and his motorcade was on. And seeing the motorcade go by was pretty cool. I mean, they were running, cops both sides of the yellow line. About 30 cops running up and down, running side by side with him. They were blocking off every possible access point to the highway with a cop car. It was insane. It was kind of cool to watch. And you just had to pull over and wait till they passed you, and they were like till all the cop cars were done. That was kind of interesting to see. And Iowa used to be a swing state. And I'm hoping in 2028, because despite what some Republicans and some major Trump supporters are wanting to say, Donald Trump cannot and will not run in 2028. He is not going to be eligible. They are not going to be able to pass an amendment of making him eligible to run. That's not going to happen. He's now term limited out. They can't pass anything through Congress that would supersede the Constitution, so that's out. So he's done. Who do the Republicans run in 2028? And now I want to see what happens to a place like Iowa. Is Iowa going to be able to go back to being a swing state? Is it going to be purple again? I think that's possible. Vance, possibly. Here's the thing, that all depends on what happens. There's not a big bench for Republicans. I will disagree with you, Kathy. There is not a bench for Republicans. It's not very deep. Do you not realize that we will? What do you mean, Connie? There's not a big bench for Republicans. They don't. Yeah, I don't trust internal polling. I don't trust really any polling. Um, as far as Vance beating Harris, doubt it. Vance, maybe, but he's problem is he's going to have 4 years of being in uh whatever this administration ends up being, and if it ends up being as bad as it is projected that it could be, he's not going to get that stench off of him. It's not going to work. Ramaswamy, doubt it. He couldn't gain any traction in the primary. Same with Haley, same with DeSantis. They weren't gaining traction anywhere. They weren't. They weren't gaining traction. The only reason Nikki Haley was getting the votes she was getting toward the end of the primary, that she was still getting any sort of traction and she was still getting uh, votes even after she dropped out, was because that was Republicans saying, I didn't want to vote for Trump. You're saying, what are you saying, your average Democrat? Are you saying that Republicans would have had a 340 plus electoral college victory versus Harris, or Harris would have had 340 without Trump on the ticket? Which way are you saying that? But Republicans don't have a deep bench. Not really. People come out for Trump. There's no way DeSantis would have beaten Kamala Harris, because it would have been an entirely. Here's the thing. Looking back at it that way, if Donald Trump didn't run, okay, if he didn't run, if they never would have brought him back in, if they never would have brought Donald Trump back into the fold, and never would have, after January 6th, and let him just stayed out of Mar-a-Lago and ignored him, Joe Biden wouldn't have ran. Joe Biden wouldn't have ran in 2024 if Donald Trump didn't run. But then 2 years before the election, Donald Trump says, I'm running, because he thought being a candidate was going to keep him out of prison, which it ultimately did, and was going to prevent all of his uh, that was going to prevent all of his trials from ever taking place. Henry Cumberlander says, we're going to run Hakeem Jeffries. Okay, I'm okay with that. I like Hakeem Jeffries. I got no problem with Hakeem Jeffries at all. And if I'm right and either Democrats end up keeping or flipping the House this time, or if they flip the House in 26, DeSantis was raising and outperforming Trump for quite a while in the primary. Crazy momentum. He was for a bit, until Donald Trump really got going. Once he really started and he turned his sights on DeSantis, that was the end of it. But if the Democrats either have the House this time, or if they flip the House in the midterms and Hakeem ends up Speaker, he will end up being a rising star out of the Democratic Party, and being on the national stage like that could springboard him into a presidential run. And I'd be okay with Hakeem Jeffries. I think he's charismatic. He's younger. I think this is nothing necessarily against older people, but I want to see some youth in all elected positions. I mean, and this isn't even a knock on Kamala Harris, Because, she just turned 60. I'm not considering her an old person. But I am tired of old people in politics. Don Stewart says, did we get the House? They have not called the House. Last numbers I saw, 210 Republican, 201 Democrat, 24 races to call. It is looking like Republicans may get the House because they only need 8 of those 24 seats. But I don't know which seats are still up for grabs. I have not looked that deep into it. I'm just waiting for the total. But even if Republicans have the House, it's going to be by a slim majority. What? Which one's scary? Them having the House? I'm not as worried about it. They can't get along right now. Oh, so they called 2 more? Okay. Yeah. Rotunda, I don't think so. It's not that scary because they can't get along with each other. They're going to be sitting, if they have the House, it's going to be sitting about like it is now, by about 4 or 5 votes. And they can't agree with each other. They're already talking about changing the rules that if they oust the speaker, the interim speaker can actually just do House business until they get a speaker, because as the rules stand right now, with no speaker of the House of Representatives cannot function without a speaker. It can't do anything other than hold votes on who the speaker is going to be. That's the only thing they can do without a speaker. Remember, when they got the House back in 2022, it took them 17 votes to come up with Kevin McCarthy. And he was the guy. What? You think them having all 3 branches would be a good change? I mean, it'll be interesting. We'll see what they actually get accomplished. If they do have all 3 branches, they in theory could pass most of what they want. Problem is, they still got the filibuster in the Senate. Democrats are going to use that. Oh, making it so interim speaker can conduct House business. I think that could be interesting. The only issue I have with that is it gives them no reason to ever have a speaker. The whole idea, but if they only go with interims, well, then it prevents them. They never have to agree to get to a speaker, or they do once, to start the session, and then after that, and then they have, they vote, they get him in, they oust him almost immediately, and there you go. Now they sit with an interim speaker for the rest of the time, and that makes it tough. But at least if they do that rule change, the only good thing is that it would maybe eliminate some of the issues around funding, debt ceiling, things like that. Like, we got a funding bill. They are going to have to pass some kind of a funding thing in December that Joe Biden is going to have to sign. And what I think they're going to do is I think they're going to kick the can down the road. They're just going to keep spending levels where they are so Joe Biden signs it, and they'll kick it out to March till Republicans have complete control. And then from there it'll be a rubber stamp for, there won't be big fights over the spending, I don't think. They're not going to try to shut down the government. But after the Republicans have control, there might be a government shutdown then, after Republicans have both branches of Congress and the presidency. Because remember, in Trump's first administration, they shut down the government because of funding. They couldn't come to an agreement on getting anything funded. And that's what happened. Average Democrat says, I wish they'd institute single issue bills. I know what you mean, but the problem with there's 2 problems with single issue bills. One is sometimes to address one issue, you need to address a secondary issue. There's a lot of things that happen that way, where in order to address this, you also have to address this, and then it gets into nitpicking of, well, is that one thing or two? Because you had to address two things to tackle the one thing. Um, the other thing with the single issue stuff is it's always been a thing where they do the big issue bills until really until Barack Obama got elected. How Congress would work is they did a lot of horse trading. They did a lot of horse trading where it was, well, you vote for my bill, I vote for you. You know, you vote for this bill I want to get passed. We'll write this thing in here for you or for your district or whatever. And then when your bill comes up, if you put in something for me, then I'll vote for your bill. I don't remember what the bill was or what year. It's been a long time. But there was one that Chuck Grassley, a senator from Iowa, got passed. He got snuck in, and it was some absorbent or some huge amount of money to figure out why hog confinements stink. Because some of the voters here in Iowa were telling him they were tired of being in these small towns surrounded by hog confinements and having to deal with the smell. And they put in a bunch of money. And it was something where he got it funded in a bill where he traded his vote for that. That's why they do the multi-issue bills, because you sneak in these things one way or the other, and both parties do it. Joe Manchin was notorious for that, because he'd say, "Well, I can't vote for that and take it back to my district," because he was from West Virginia. He was a Democrat running in a very red state, so he'd say, "You got to give me something. You got to give me something I can take to my voters," and he'd get protections for coal, or he would get, money for roads or whatever it was he wanted. He would get something that he could take to his voters and say, "Hey, I got this for you. I couldn't stop him from doing that, but at least I got you this as well." That's how politics has always been played. And, we're now in an era of politics where at least one side wants to keep it where it is, I want everything I want, and I want you to support what I want, but I'm not going to give you anything on the backside. They don't want to do the horse trading. They don't want to do the compromise stuff. And the compromises, that's one of the reasons why Barack Obama got everything he did passed. He had Joe Biden as his VP who could go to Capitol Hill, get compromises between both houses of Congress, both parties. He knew everybody, and he could work deals, and he could get those things done. So I don't know if single issue bills are the way to go. Kind of got off topic there for a second, but I mean, it would make things easier in some aspects, harder in others. It would make it easier on the American people, so you don't have these 1,500-page bills chocked full of everything with no time to read all of it. But Democrats have used those multi-issue bills too. One of the things that everyone has been worried about, I wanted to touch on in this live, is that there's talk that Donald Trump may try to pull the United States out of NATO. Well, there was a defense spending bill passed, I believe it was this year, it was either last year or this year, that Joe Biden did sign that had a clause in there that would require it's either 2/3 of the Senate or 2/3 of both chambers, I don't remember which, to approve before we can be withdrew from NATO. There is some legal protection there. So, for those people worried about NATO being crippled by Donald Trump, there's laws in place that says he can't do that. And we are still going to be part of NATO. That's not going to be a thing. So it's not going to be that some of the really worst of it is not going to be as bad as what it could be. In part because their margins are going to be so small in Congress, they're not going to be able to agree enough to pass anything. I talked about it a couple times in this live, as I've been going for almost 2 hours now. Um, like they're not going to have the numbers to pass any constitutional amendments. That's just not going to happen. And some of what they want to do is going to require constitutional amendments. It's going to require Congress. Like they can't just go in and gut these government agencies and say, "Well, day one, I say you're closed." That's not how that works. They have to get Congress to agree to shut the government agencies. And again, as I've said numerous times the last few days since we got this devastating defeat on election night, politicians, if nothing else, love power. And they know they have to go get reelected in 2 years. What if he gets Project 2025? Big chunks of that are going to require either Congress or amendments. And as I was just saying, Congress knows they have to get reelected. Like, I think there's something in Project 2025 about making it so you can't vote anymore. Well, that requires a constitutional amendment. And, you know, they're not going to have 2/3 of both chambers of Congress. They're not going to get 38 states to agree to it. Probably won't happen. It's a wish list. Some of it's very scary, which is why we were talking about it. But I don't think a lot of it has a chance of actually getting implemented because congressional Republicans, if nothing else, love power and they know they have to go back to their districts, back to their states, and get reelected. And if they do some of the most egregious stuff, you know, they know that if they do it, they're pretty much guaranteeing that Republicans never get elected again. Like wanting to get rid of, for example, FEMA. We just went through 2 major hurricanes. I guarantee you that for all the calls against FEMA that were happening at that point, you won't see anything happen to FEMA. It was all talking points going into the election, etc. They're not going to want to get rid of FEMA because if there is another hurricane during the Trump administration that hits, say, Florida, they're going to want to have the federal government come help them. Despite what they might say about wanting to send it back to the states, they know that it's not going to work, and that congressional politicians know they can't take that to their voters and get themselves reelected. John says elections will end for everything. How? How? As an American citizen, you have the right to vote in an election, and in order for that to change, they would have to pass a constitutional amendment. And they're not going to have the numbers to pass a constitutional amendment. They do not have 2/3 of both chambers of Congress. They will not get 38 states to agree to that. I would be surprised if they did get 2/3 of both chambers of Congress to say, you know what, no more elections, that you would even get 1 state to agree to that. It just won't happen. It's not going to be a thing. There will be elections. But one of the reasons I did talk about Donald Trump saying you never have to vote again, I talked about it because it's a scary thing for a presidential candidate to be saying. I just don't think that it's a realistic thing for them to actually make happen. Going to be wrapping this up here shortly. I'd like to thank everybody that came out, that engaged in the conversation. I know some of you have been in here for quite a while. Appreciate all the comments, all the feedback. It's been a great conversation. So I do like that. Planning to keep doing more of these lives where we look at what's going on. I've been trying to wrap my head around everything after dealing with this devastating election. And now we got to get back at it. We got to get to work and we got to go forward. Um, we will get through it. It is going to be hard. It's going to be difficult. Um, but as Americans, we survive. We get through tough times. And, even though it doesn't look like it, there are protections that will be in place that will, safeguard us. And if nothing else, the biggest one is congressional Republicans not being able to agree with each other. That's going to be a big one. For those of you that do like my content, whenever I do these lives, I do record them. I will be putting this up over on my YouTube page. I am Analytical Iowan over on YouTube as well. Just to let anybody who didn't get in on the entire live, who wants to listen, it's there as an option. Like I said earlier in my live, I do have some government answers lists over there. When I see people have questions about how government works, and I see them repeatedly in people's comment sections, or it just looks like a really good question or some confusion about how something works, I try to put up some videos talking about how these things happen, how these things work. I've got one that may end up being really relevant, actually, talking about presidential line of succession. Donald Trump is not the most healthy man. He is now the oldest person to ever be elected president. And there is a chance he does not survive all the way through to 2028. For one reason or another, whether it's his health that gets him, whether, he's physically just unable, whether they 25th Amendment him, whether he dies. Any of that is possible. And I've got a whole thing over there about, I think it's a 10 to 15 minute video where I discuss, the presidential line of succession, how it works, etc., and what happens in the case of vacancies, things like that. And because I was seeing confusion, I'm still seeing confusion about stuff like that. So that's why I do those videos. They are up there over on my YouTube page. This will be up. If I don't have any issues with YouTube like I did yesterday, I did a live yesterday. That is up over there. But for some reason, it took almost 24 hours for YouTube to load it. I don't know why. It was being dumb. So I'm going to get this posted up yet tonight, I hope. This will be up there if anybody wants to go check out the whole thing if you missed part of it. Plan to do more of these and just sit and talk about politics, try to make us all feel better. Because, like I said, it's going to get bad, but we have some safeguards, we have some hope, and we just got to make it to midterms. And I believe Democrats will retake both branches in the midterms, both branches of Congress anyway. And then nothing Donald Trump wants to do will be accomplished if that happens. So thank everybody for joining me on the live. I hope you guys all have a great night, and I will catch you the next time I go live. All right, for those following me here on YouTube, I just ended the live over there. I'm just checking out some of the finalities here. I got hit with only one restriction this time. Didn't seem to affect my numbers as far as streaks or viewability. I still had quite a few more people watching than normal. Had some comments in there. So overall, it was a good live. Thank you guys for watching. Plan to do more of them. Don't know if it's going to continue to be daily, but it's been fun. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.